Well, hey, good morning to you. Good morning to everybody. Welcome. Good morning, George. How are you, sir?
G'day, mate.
The world wants to know, did you sleep last night?
No, not really. It was a very similar night to the night before, because I'm an idiot and I leave things to the last minute.
Are you coming to the end of the semester or something? Is that why all the marking, or is it just a
not the end of the semester, mid-semester break. So it ends at Easter weekend, signals the middle of the first semester for us at Otago.
Yeah.
And so we get a week off, and usually before that is when the students have to hand in a lot of assignments. So that's what I've been doing, heaps of marking, but also because I am horrible at just like putting things off.
I caught wrong word. I as a man in his 40s is wont to do, I got up to use the facilities at 1 o'clock this morning and saw the light on in my 15-year-old's room and went into her room and went, I use more appropriate language than this. I went, what the fuck is going on? And she says, I've got to get this finished by tomorrow. So we had a bit of a chat about that today. And unfortunately, it's hard for me to be critical of her because I'm certainly the person who the night before the essay was due started at around 10 p.m. That was my MO. So it's hard to be critical, but you still want to put better practices into your kids than you should be doing work at 1 o'clock in the morning before school starts to get it finished in time.
Yeah.
So yes. Hey, let's bring Chewy in. Chewy's with us today to co-host. Chewy, good morning to you, sir.
How you doing, mate?
Good to see your beautiful face.
Yeah, just fresh off a huge sneezing fit. So that's awesome.
Everything okay? We're not doing it's not the dirty C word sneezing fit.
No, just the allergies.
The cracker fit.
Cracker fit. Yeah, it's the dirty C word. That's the new C word, the one that you're not allowed to say online. Remember, there was that time for a while. You guys will be aware of this, I'm sure, even if you didn't participate, where like if you mentioned the word COVID or if you said vaccine or if you said, they reckon people were getting their stuff pulled off YouTube, and so they were calling about like the C word and that kind of stuff because they didn't want to be pulled off YouTube for saying the wrong word. I thought it was all horse shit, but there was a sector of typically right-wing kind of worrying people saying that the reason their videos were getting pulled down was because they said the word COVID, as opposed to all the disinformation they were putting out behind that C word.
It is fair to say that like there are words and images and phrases that for some mysterious reason the algorithm would just be like nah and just not push it to people's suggested lists as much as it would normally do, but it's usually not direct human action, but it's just sort of the system that we've created that's got totally out of control, right? It's Skynet, but it's censoring like random ass shit.
I hate the
algorithm.
I hate the algorithm because what the algorithm does is pulls things down if it sees things, and then it takes you 4 or 5 or 6 days to get it released. And when you're doing this kind of broadcast, which is basically daily news, to have something restricted for a few days, then it's pointless unrestricting it. So the algorithm can go fuck itself. Oh, we've just been taken down. Oh wow. Anywho, morning, Chewy. It's good to see you, mate. Haven't seen you for a week. How you been? Things going well?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm living the bachelor life at the moment. My partner's up doing her studies up in Auckland.
How long for?
She goes away for a week every sort of 3 months, generally around the school holidays and stuff.
Is that PhD, masters on that kind of level? Is it
masters in art therapy. Really, really, really interesting stuff.
Wow.
But every couple of months I have to live the bachelor life. So just living off one bowl and one fork and one knife.
jotting this down. Masters in Art Theory. That's another professional we can call on to come talk on the show. There we go. Hi.
Therapy.
Therapy. Yeah, I know a little, not from personal use, but I know of people who use that for their kids, and they go and they talk to a counselor whilst they're doing art and that kind of stuff, and it sort of frees up various synapses and it opens them up, and yeah, amazing.
Yeah, there's wonderful services for adults as well when it comes to that sort of thing. I think there's one I think there's two in Dunedin actually that do that sort of thing.
Cool, man. Well, today's show, we've got a bunch of stuff going on. We are going to be having a look. It's kind of a flow on from a conversation we had yesterday, Chewy, which you probably haven't seen or heard, but it was to do with misogynism, being misogynistic. And a big part of the conversation for me was, what do these words mean and how do we identify, what they are? Like how do we know when someone is being a misogynist versus just a proper cunt? Or just and do, I mean, I guess you could also then argue, George, and maybe many would, what does it matter if they're being a proper cunt? Then they're being a proper cunt anyway. It's almost irrelevant why. But for me, especially with doing things like this and what I've done for my whole career working in broadcasting, is that words matter, and understanding of what words mean and how they're used in common parlance matters, mostly because I want to communicate as clearly as possible with people, and I want people to understand what I'm saying. And if the words I'm using and that are being used mean something different to a huge portion of society, then I feel, let's be blunt, for the content we're putting out, I need to understand that to be able to address that. So that's one of the reasons I mean, some may say I'm a bit pedantic about it, but I'm really interested in words and what they mean and how they're used, because it's important. You can flow on from that as well and say, from words become changes in society, from those changes in society become changes in the legislation. And so that there's a natural progression of what that is. So we're going to have a look at not yesterday's conversation, but the reason my brain was firing was from that conversation into today, with a guy called Stephen Crowder, who, to be honest, I'm not the hugest of fans of, but I caught a clip that he made the other day where they were talking about a particular word and what it means, and I think it kind of gives an example of what I'm talking about. So rather than using it as an example to support him and what he's doing, I want to purely isolate it and look at it as an example of what words are and how they're used and what they mean. So, a broken clock is right twice a day. Not saying that he's right in the situation, but I guess a terrible, revolting broadcaster can be used for positive twice a year. Can I say that? Is that fair? Do you know what we're saying? Anyway. Also going to have a look, and we heard news in the last, I don't know whether it was yesterday or the last 36 hours, of course, of another death that's being attributed to the COVID vaccine. Talk about the algorithms taking us down. But it's been released officially. MedSafe has said it, so we should be talking about it, and we should be talking about it realistically and what it all means. And also, Christopher Luxon, maybe we'll start with this, shall we, George? Christopher Luxon has been, it's almost like, when people leave the White House communication team, they turn up on Fox News or they turn up on MSNBC or whatever. It's almost like Chris Luxon has been invited by TV3 to be an advisor for Labour.
Yeah. A revolving door. Yeah. Well, there's also like a National Party Air New Zealand revolving door, it seems like, as well.
Yeah. Let's start there, shall we? Okay, now, I'm obviously being slightly facetious. I prefer to think of it that I'm placing my tongue firmly in my cheek than being facetious about this. But there was a report put out by the government where we're being told that the number of Kiwis leaving New Zealand is going to, quote unquote, skyrocket. Excuse me. That wasn't a C word cough, by the way. TV3 had Mr. Luxon on this morning in their breakfast show, AM, and they asked him what Labour should do. Let's first have a look at the interaction. So this story is based on the idea that there's an official report out by the government or by a government agency talking about the upcoming number of people that are going to be leaving New Zealand. So the setup is Christopher Luxon was asked by TV3, you know, what should the government do about this? How do we keep Kiwis in New Zealand? And this was the response.
Oh, look, I've travelled all around the world. I think New Zealand's a great place. I have to say to you, though, that, you know, the OE is an everyday sort of, or a real rite of passage, I guess, for Kiwis. And we want Kiwis to be able to travel. But what we don't want them doing is choosing to leave New Zealand because they don't think it's a place of opportunity where they can get ahead. And I think you're right. I think for young people today, and the ones that I talk to up and down the country, they're saying, look, my wages are low relative to Australia, the housing's cheaper, and the cost of living is almost half. And so we don't want them thinking that there's more opportunity in other places for them to settle long term and to be able to leave our country and have our talented brain drain sort of exit this place. And so we've got to work much harder at making sure this is a place where people feel they can start up a business, they can make something happen in their community, and it's a great place to raise their families. And so first and foremost for me, the government needs to get a much better grip on this cost of living crisis. So that's about managing inflation. Today, we're going to see interest rates be announced. They're either going to go up another 25 or 50 basis points already this year. If you're lucky enough to own a home, your interest costs have gone up $8,000 on a $700,000 mortgage. The government has to do a few things. It can't just leave it to rising interest rates. It has to be able to control and rein.
There we go. Melissa's about to come back in there and keep talking. But the point's been made. So, as I said, obviously, tongue-in-cheek, facetious, whichever word you want to use, TV3 basically seeking advice for Labour from Christopher Luxon. What should this government do? It just made me think it's a really interesting question. What should the government do? But how about we bring on an economist or a business professional or an employment specialist to actually answer the question, rather than the leader of the opposition to use it to score points and just basically say, how do we fix it? Well, they're crap. They can't. We'll do better. Sure.
Yeah, 100%. Like the brain drain and people going overseas is something that we've dealt with for decades. And COVID was always going to, you know, people came home because our COVID response was really good. And they were always going to go back overseas. I don't understand the freak out here. I mean, he's identified what the problem is. Our wages are low and our cost of living is high. Some of those things you can solve. But yeah, you don't hear any solutions from him. You just hear, here's the problem. I mean, my sister's a nurse, and they've gotten through this whole thing being the literal front line. And yeah, she could leave tomorrow and go to Australia and effectively almost double her wages. She doesn't necessarily want to, but when you're looking at paying down an enormous student loan or trying to buy a very expensive house, what are you going to do?
Look, Chewy, I think the point that you're making is sort of what I want to echo as well, is the reason it feels like disingenuous politicking in this situation. It's a little bit like, you know, oh, we're going to solve the housing crisis. It's a trope that every political party puts out in the lead up to the election. They suck at housing. We're going to do better. And then nothing changes because it's very hard to change a housing situation when we have not enough builders to build houses, a demand outweighing supply. And this feels a bit the same because he's saying, you know, we don't want our people to go offshore for more opportunity. I don't want to be the bearer of bad tidings to anybody, but there will always be more opportunity offshore than in New Zealand. Always. Because New Zealand is tiny and the rest of the world is very, very large, where there is 100%. More opportunity. The other thing about more money, again, I don't want to be a bearer of bad tidings, but there will always be more money offshore. Because if you go into a market of 300 million people, let's say to America, and you rise through the ranks, then there is more money made by those businesses. They pay their people more. And finally, there will always be cheaper living overseas. I mean, because we are an island isolated from everywhere that brings everything to this country. It's no different from in Hawaii. So much more expensive to live in Hawaii than it is to live in California. And part of that is because they have to get stuff bought to them from the mainland. And it makes cost of living more expensive, whether it's food or building materials or whatever. So this feels disingenuous, and it feels like, I would love to have a good conversation. Maybe we can do it here about that. How do we stop this happening? Do we need to stop this happening? But to just kind of softball the leader of the opposition, I don't know. I think it's a missed opportunity.
I've been saying this to MPs for years, and they'll make a statement, and then you go, "Oh, that sounds really good. How? How are you going to make it easier for people to start a business?" I mean, I can think of a way now: get investment money out of housing. So if people want to invest their money, they've got to invest it in a local business. That's a better rate of return. That solves two problems. But also, how? How should always be the question that these guys are fielding. Because otherwise it's just talking points.
Deindustrialization and globalization is definitely going to make that sort of those potential ways of combating brain drain harder. I mean, I don't think it's impossible to, for example, raise wages so more people stay, right? I don't think we should box ourselves in. It's bloody difficult because the powers that be, especially if Luxon gets in, don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, is he going to raise the wages of all the nurses? Do you think national? That's going to happen under national?
Exactly.
It's not happening under Labour, so
yeah. But there are ways we can still appeal to people, and it might even be how we define that appealingness as well. New Zealand's still a nice place to live. For some people, it's also their home, and they might have this deep connection with it, or the geography of the place and that sort of thing. But yeah, definitely like cost of living and that sort of thing is not helped by deindustrialization and
let me
globalization.
also just say a couple of things before we move on to the next one. Is that, I mean, to his credit, Mr. Luxon talked about the OE. It's a part of who we are because we're living in the bottom of the world. Have you got the same page as me, George?
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I'm going to grab it off you actually.
It seems pretty.
There you go. Look at that.
Seems pretty speedy.
Is because we've always done the OE. We've always left. That's the first thing, because we live at the bottom of the world, and for us to see anything, we need to go elsewhere. The second thing is, I didn't include the question from the journalist, but it talks about leaving permanently. I know the last time I did this research, leaving permanently meant being out of the country for more than 12 months. That's what leaving permanently means. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm never coming back. And finally, this is the chart that I wanted to bring up. Sorry to steal it off you there, George, but you can have it back in a second. This is the number of New Zealanders departing since back to 2002. And what you can see what happened, and because the report talks about 50,000 people, and Luxon on some level is pearl clutching, saying that it's terrible. The average number of Kiwis departing New Zealand before COVID, which is here, was between 42, 45 and 72,000 people. Ironically, the biggest number was under National here at 72,000 people. But this is an early century Labour government, and you can see over their term, more and more every year, more and more Kiwis left, and then National gets in, and then fewer Kiwis left, and then under National, a big upscript to more and more Kiwis left, and then it goes through the National government here where fewer left, and then it gets to COVID, and obviously goes a bit mad under COVID where no one's leaving and more people, the black line, are coming. So the pearl clutching of the network giving Mr. Luxon a chance to comment on this. So now what they've given him an opportunity to do is see down here where we've got only 8,000 people leaving. If that jumps up to 50,000 next year, which would be the norm, there's no question that the National Party will be going, gosh, look at that, an extra, it's gone up by, what would that be, 500, 600, 700% under Labour. It's like, well, yeah, that's because no one's leaving now because of COVID, and the number last time under National was up to 72,000 a year. This is what I talk about when I want us to go one step deeper and at least show people what the truth is behind the tropes. The truth behind the tropes. There you go, George. I've just given us a tagline. The truth behind the tropes. Because it frustrates me. And like I said, great question. How do we stop this? The first answer would be maybe we don't, because we never have. But the second answer is if we do, let's get someone on with the actual qualifications to tell us how to stop it, as opposed to the leader of the opposition party. And when I say the leader of the opposition party, I'm saying forevermore. I'm not talking about Mr. Luxon in that instance. I'm talking about the leader of the opposition party now. And let's say we have a different government in 18 months, the same for the leader of the opposition party then. Let's get the experts in to talk about it, as opposed to the people to score points and manipulate the data to tell a story that's not really there.
Yeah, do you think this is something that's come out of just the pursuit of just a soundbite or a headline? That the way that we consume our media and the way that we interact with our politicians is we're not reading an expansive article with this is how we're going to fix things. You have like a 30-second conversation that someone will see on YouTube or on Facebook, and that's it. Oh, yeah, no, he's saying the things that I agree with, so I'm going to vote for him based off a 30-second chat or a preconceived opinion.
To me, that has there's two aspects to that. If that is the case, then the politicians have to choose to participate in that.
Mm.
And if they choose to participate in it, things like what we're doing here are going to fail forevermore. And one of the reasons we get a lot of academics on, and they all come back to us saying how much they love it, is we talk for until we're finished 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 minutes until we've got enough information out there. So I have two thoughts about what you're saying. If that is the case, then the politicians need to stop doing it. And if they chose to stop doing it, here's a perfect platform to come on and expand a bit further on the conversation. If they don't want to do that because they don't want people like me to go, but hang on, under national, 72,000 people were leaving. It seems the norm. What's the problem here? Then they will continue to do that to the detriment of, I guess, delving a bit deeper and looking into what's going on. Maybe it's the way they can hide the deeper conversation, which would be really sad. So there needs to be, and I'm not saying yay us, well, I guess I am a little bit, but there needs to be places like this, and like, I guess Jack Tame's Saturday morning program on TVNZ to have some more space and time to actually delve into it. And then we just hope that those people who have the access and have the time do then delve into it. That's the next part of it. Will a journalist actually delve into it, risking annoying that person and not having them back on again? I hope they do.
Yeah.
Righty. Let us have a look at the very sad news that we heard. I think it was yesterday, might have been the day before, about another vaccine, another death linked to vaccine. Dr. Ashley Bloomfield confirmed on Tuesday that the third death in New Zealand linked to the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine was a teenager. The Ministry of Health announced the death on Monday night. The ministry said the person had myocarditis when they died. The heart condition, usually caused by a viral infection, included COVID-19, is a rare side effect of the Pfizer vaccine, with around 30 cases per million vaccinations in New Zealand, according to MedSafe. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this and bring this up is there will be some in society who will be accusing some in the media about not wanting to talk about this. Because it's like, we've always told you the vaccine causes deaths. And I guess no one has said in any stage, and the Prime Minister said it on Sunday night on her Sunday program, that with any medical intervention, there are side effects for a small sector of the population. So we did want to bring this up here. We did want to look at it. We did want to look at what it means. And we did want to bring, again, a bit of a context to it. But honestly, not to sound flippant, but I guess firstly, I really wanted to say, and we talked about the other day, George, about the 26-year-old in Dunedin who's one of the deaths that's said to be, linked to the vaccine. Just utterly tragic story. Just completely, whatever aroha we can send out to friends and family of this person who's passed, and I got to say, just to be completely fair and accurate, at the end of this article, I'm pretty sure it does say that they're still being determined by the coroner. So it's not like 100% yet, but, let's just take it as read that that's what has been said, is that, people who are trying to keep their friends and families and themselves safe, have that. It's an utterly tragic story. And before we go on to the next part of it, if you guys want to jump in and now, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, one of the things, this is like the third death of, I think the same thing, that myocarditis. I butchered the pronunciation of that.
Yeah.
They keep on mentioning as well that when you get COVID, you've got like a chance to get that same reaction, but at a much higher rate. Yeah, it's gutting, and I hate to see these, I guess, bad actors jump on somebody else's tragedy to go, see, we were right, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. They're covering all the other ones up, and I just always think is like, well, if they're covering them up, why mention this one at all? Why wouldn't you just cover them all up rather than let us know about 3 of them?
Yeah. And look, I think this is the time where, and look, I like we talked about the other day, I'm aware that if you're someone who has been impacted by wanting to do the right thing with your health or your family's health, and you've had a detrimental negative impact from it, that for you, talking about the stats and the figures might seem cold-hearted and, not appropriate. Because like we said of the girlfriend of the 26-year-old Dunedin guy who passed away, 100% of her boyfriends died after taking the vaccine. So that's her perspective, and I get that. I think, though, and as I said, I know this can sound cold-hearted and it's not supposed to, but I do want to look at it in context. I do want to look at what it means for the whole country. So even if we look at the numbers that were given out in that article, it talked about 30 cases per million. Now, in New Zealand, we've had 11 million vaccinations. That means there's probably been, based on those numbers, about 330 cases of myocarditis brought on by the vaccine. I know someone who had it happen to them. In most, if not all instances, well, I guess what we've been told, maybe apart from 3, it either corrects itself or with medical intervention, it's a pretty easy correct. I know with the 26-year-old in Dunedin, they didn't seek medical attention. It'll be interesting. I don't know. There's 3. I don't know what the second case is. I actually haven't heard of it. But this third case, it'll be interesting to see whether they sought medical attention or not. And it's not a criticism. I'm just interested to see how it panned out. If you actually look at the numbers, if there's been 330 cases on average of myocarditis and 3 deaths, that's obviously less than a 1% mortality rate from myocarditis from people who get it. And if you obviously look at that 3 deaths out of 11 million vaccinations, I actually know what the number is. Go look at it. It's 0.000027% mortality. So when you look at across the spectrum at what it means for safety, even if you get myocarditis, it seems incredibly safe.
Did you see the piece the other day from that Dunedin long-term study? And they were talking about, I guess, trust in authority and trust in medical intervention and the effect that their early lives had on how they approached that. I mean, I've been pretty.
Should we synopsize that first? Let's synopsize that first, eh? Because from what people who didn't see it, from memory, what I said, this Dunedin study is one of the most amazing studies the world over, because I think it started in either 72 or 73, which means it's either 49 or 50 years old, a longitudinal study that they've been looking at a group of New Zealanders and how. So it's an amazing study. And what it basically found was, now correct me if I'm wrong here, Chewy, because I'm just thinking back here, is that people who came from a poorer background or had a harder upbringing in their younger life were more likely to reject things like the vaccine and stuff today. Is that a fair synopsis?
If you've been shoddily handled by authorities throughout your life, why would you listen to the authorities now? You know, is I guess the shorthand version of that. And I mean, I've been pretty strident throughout this whole COVID thing of like not wanting to jump on people for having questions about should I get vaccinated, for having, I guess, legitimate questions or concerns around it. I'm really critical of the people that have seen these people and gone, there's my mark. That's my audience. I'm going to take advantage of these guys. And I'm really talking about Voices for Freedom and various other groups around that that have really cashed in some case literally, on these people that have had a rough time in their lives, maybe a consistently rough run through their lives. You know, if they've been in state care, why would you ever trust the state again? I 100% understand that. And the comments out of that study, out of that piece of that study, is the only way that you're going to get through to these people is by empathizing. And I guess reading that like that hit me there. I was like, oh yeah, okay. I've got to be a bit more gentle around my comments.
And I think when I'm trying to be gentle now, this is sort of what we're doing. Like I've said this numerous times on this show, is that I'm a firm believer of leading a horse to water, right? I want you to have the information, and the empathy comes in about offering the glass to take the actual drink, right? And that's what we're trying to do, because the flow on from this conversation of the vaccine deaths is the obvious question to now ask is, well, how many people has the vaccine saved? That's a part of the conversation as well, which I'm going to get to in a minute, but you look like you're not quite finished yet, Chewie. You've got something else to add?
No, go ahead.
We don't, or when I say we don't have, I couldn't find any data specifically to New Zealand, but I did find some data coming out of the US about vaccination program at year one, how many deaths and hospitalizations have been averted. And it says in their research, and it's done by a group called commonwealthfund.org, in the absence of vaccination program, there would have been approximately 1.1 million additional COVID-19 deaths and more than 10.3 million additional COVID-19 hospitalizations in the US by November 2021. Without the US vaccination program, COVID deaths would have been approximately 3.2 times higher, and COVID-19 hospitalizations approximately 4.9 times higher than during the actual toll during 2021. Now, I am extrapolating, obviously, but if you brought that across to New Zealand, we'd be talking about 1,500 deaths rather than 500. And we'd be talking at the moment, there's about 600 people in hospital. You'd be talking at the moment nearly 3,000 people in hospital. Yep. Now, I can't say conversation overdone. I stand by this information because America is different from New Zealand. We need to do the background on who's done the research. You know, maybe this is like when you sometimes look at research, it becomes are these people Pfizer affiliated groups? I'm not sure. I think I just want to at least float out there as well that if these numbers are correct, and I'll say if because I want to be fair, 1,000 deaths have been saved, along with 3 deaths have been caused. Not to minimize the deaths to the people who know. Horrific, horrible. My heart honestly goes out to you. But probably when it comes to public health, these are some of the numbers and some of the things that the public health commentators and people who make policy need to put out in place to see, you know, it sounds horrible, but what's the better outcome?
Yeah. No, 100%. Whenever you're talking about, you know, a population level response, it's really hard. You can't focus on the individual stories. You've got to you start talking about percentages, and it does get really, really cold and clinical really, really quickly.
What's going on at your place today? Your dog's pretty active.
She really is. She's waiting for the dog walker to come and pick her up.
You got a dog walker?
I will go and sort her out.
That's amazing. That's amazing. We'll have to bring you back in, George, to continue the next conversation then, mate, because Chewie's got to go on and sorted out the wee dog.
Not a problem.
Let's jump into the next conversation, which is there is a conversation going. Gareth wants to join in about here as well. Who let the dogs out? Well, I guess that's Chewie. That's what he's doing right now. Yeah, I want to move into the next part of the call. Gareth wanted to know who let the dogs out, Chewie.
I just did. She was excited because when an entire van full of dogs about to go on an adventure walk turn up, yep, she's like, me too.
I have to say, this is a tangent now, obviously, but I very much enjoy, because I am a dog owner. I don't know if you're the same, Chewie. My TikTok account is often flooded with dog videos because that's what I did, and I was just looking to see how do I bring up my favorites on the thing. There was a very cute one yesterday, and I was going to show it because we're talking about dogs, but I'm not sure how to bring up my favorites when it comes to the online version of TikTok. See, my TikTok is sort of full of dogs at the best of times. It's either full of dogs or it's full of politicians sticking their tongues out like this. So speaking of Mr. Luxon, but see, I'm an equal opportunist because if it's not Mr. Luxon, it's the Prime Minister.
That's amazing.
optimal position and we don't lose the gains that everyone's worked so hard for.
I love that so much.
It's good, eh? Look at that. It's such good AI as well. It's actually kind of terrifying how good it is. And as you can see, my feed is full of the dog. My kids and me get on here every time and go, "Oh, do you remember when she was only that big?"
Down.
Oh, he's your puppy.
Teaching.
So
Of course, now and then we get into. Probably should take the music off because it'll get banned. Then we get into the big girl who's an absolute ball hog. So yeah. Anyway, I can't find the one where I was going to show you. There was a dog running yesterday on a treadmill, which was interesting. So we're going to talk about the next conversation, and the next conversation is New Zealand politics, and it's talking a little bit about the Greens. And the Greens have come out talking about rejigging their leadership model again. And what they currently have, obviously, is they have a female and a male. They have co-leaders, and they want to have equity across that aspect, and they want to have the perspectives, which I guess kind of makes sense. I'm sort of the opinion in general, and it's not a black and white, but I always, for me, typically would like the best person for the job to do the job. And then if you've got several people who are all equally or can be seen as equally as good to do the job, then some of those different perspectives on the world to be brought in can always be helpful, whether it's business or whether it's politics, or having a different perspective and a different take on the world for whatever reason, whether it's sex or gender or ethnicity or class or whatever it is, can be nothing but helpful. But still, primarily for me, it's always the best person for the job at the top. The Greens have gone with this co-modelling case, except what they've actually, I can't say what they've decided. This is a conversation that they're floating at the moment about changing that co-modelling, and what they're talking about doing is having a female leader and an other. Now, by other, I don't mean as in non-binary. I mean a female and another co-leader. Now, so dropping the male co-leader, that's an easier way of saying it. And I was reading through this, and I'm pretty sure this is Martima Davidson saying this. It says the Green Party has a long-standing legacy of support, end quote, from people who, quote, operate and want to live well outside the restrictive gender norms. My thinking is, let's have a look at that. Maybe there's a basis. Let's say there's at least one female. Do we need to dictate what the other gender is at all? There are the conversations taking place, and I think it's time to review that and look at a modern 21st century approach to that model. Probably we're moving past that male-female binary, she says. So a couple of things. They're not really moving past the female binary in this conversation, because they're saying we'll keep the female co-leader, but then the other position's up for grabs. And I wonder how much of this does bring us, as it says here, a modern 21st century approach, or I wonder how much of this is, not to be too blunt, virtue signaling to put up the right appearance for a sector of their voters, which will very much approve of this. What are your thoughts?
I think it's an interesting one. I always appreciated the Greens and their co-leadership approach to things. I can see what she's saying. I don't know. Is that a focus for them going into an election?
Well, what they've actually said in that article, and I haven't got the quote for you, but I know because I read it. Someone told me I should do some more reading yesterday. I did read this. What they've said is they don't typically change their constitution in an election year because they want to focus on the election, which is why they're talking about it this year. So it may well happen this year. And it just, I don't know. It's like, I am very much about, I have no problems with the idea of the pendulum swinging for corrections, for historic wrongs, etc. Like it's completely appropriate. I have no problems with the thumb being placed on the scale at the right time for the right reason. There is something about this that does feel, we're about inclusivity and diversity, except we don't want the males in there. That just that kind of thing feels a bit. And look, I'm probably being a bit unfair because they haven't said no to a male co-leader. They've just said sort of dropping that as a necessity. Maybe there will still be male and male and female, but it does seem interesting to go. The idea is we'll keep the female, drop the male, and then anyone's available for that. So there'll be a female and another female, or a female and a transgender candidate, or a female and a non-binary, or a female and a male. So
I mean,
that whole, yeah, you go.
I'm a green voter, and I just have to say I don't really care. You know, it's not it wouldn't affect my decision to vote green or not vote green, and yeah, I just don't care about it. But then again, I'm not the target for it. I'm a straight white male. Yeah, it's.
Can I just for clarity, when you say you don't care, are you saying you don't care how the leadership makeup is, or you don't care about this new idea, or both?
I mean, as I said, I do like the fact that they've always had a co-governance approach to things. But I mean, if you're talking about dropping the male part of it and not the female requirement, I don't think New Zealand has a problem with female leaders as a whole. I know we were talking about misogyny the other day and all of that sort of stuff. Clearly, there are some people that have a problem with it. But we've had quite a few female leaders of political parties and of the country. I think we're past that part now. I almost want to say, hey, look, it's very clumsily explained of what they want to achieve there. We're going to have co-leaders, and we're going to make sure that they're not the same type of person.
Well, that's not true, because there are some people who are saying that this is one of the reasons for this is to open the door for Chloe to come through and have 2 female co-leaders. And then if that's the case, how does that be inclusive? Like, I mean, I wonder, and like I said, being fair is me saying I'm probably being unfair, because this is sort of a conversation at the moment. It's not a policy yet necessarily. But I mean, George and I were talking about before we started broadcasting, it would seem more appropriate, or if that's the right word, to me to go, well, let's just drop any criteria. Let's have co-leaders and just get the 2 best people, whoever they are. And George, why don't you say what you said? I don't want to steal your words about if it's a effective group. Then I'll let you finish that off.
Yeah, I basically said, just if the culture and the principles of the group are in line with that stuff, then you don't need that rule. I think surely, if it's sort of like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, and that's why I sort of agree with Pat that maybe it's sort of preparing groundwork for in the future, not necessarily Chloe, but maybe someone else.
I mean, I have no doubt that Chloe will get there.
Right. Yeah. So it's sort of like paving the way for that if they needed to. But I'm sort of like you, Chewy. Like, I don't really care.
But this is the thing. I think both of us, I think all of us would be of the opinion, if the co-leaders were Chloe and Martima, we'd be like, cool, that's fine. If they're the 2 best people for the job, that's fine. Or if it was like Julianne Genter had a run at the leadership, didn't make it. If it was Julianne Genter and Chloe in the next round, and Mara had moved on or something, I don't think anyone would have a problem with that. I think it's not even a problem. It's more that it's interesting to me that they would put a criteria in place for diversity that solidifies one group of people, and then it almost like says that means everyone else they got to, because then it's still not diversity. Everyone else is there kind of, but the female position is secure. That almost feels like the opposite of diversity and inclusion.
I mean, the Green Party is incredibly diverse. I wouldn't say that they have a diversity problem. I would agree. Like, have a co-leadership sort of thing, or just, like you said, if it's not broken, I don't think it's broken. Are you trying to solve a problem that isn't there?
Yeah, that happens a lot, doesn't it? And quite a bit in politics is trying to answer a question that's never been asked. Although, again, being fair, I think in that article it was saying this is a conversation happening in the green space at the moment, so maybe it is being asked. Some comments that have come in about this one in particular. Why wouldn't it be elected /man woman with identifying as matching to their chosen gender and non-binary as a candidate for either position? Well, that's the other thing. What about, I mean, I'm not getting silly, but so you can have 3. If you want to fulfill the criteria, why can't you have 3 co-leaders? I mean, there's nothing stopping that. You could have a male and a female and someone who identifies in a non-binary situation, perhaps. but then I guess you're going to get other paces that are still left outside as well. Simon says it's a seriously stupid idea to get rid of the male co-leader in the Green Party. Left-wing parties, they should just have one leader only if they're going to get rid of gender roles. Or they can still have two, but maybe both are up for grabs. I don't know. And is it misandry? Is that how you pronounce it? Richard said, is this misandry? Is that the opposite of misogyny, I'm assuming? I'm not familiar with that word so much.
I mean, the other thing with the co-leadership thing is it's always seemed funny to me because it's a statement. It is, as you said, virtue signaling. I'm not saying that in a bad way at all. That shows where their values are and that sort of thing. But the mechanics of their co-leadership, it is still what other parties do. There is a clear leader and there is a deputy. And if the Greens ever got into government, it would break down to that as well. So
right,
yeah.
So in other words, if the Green they couldn't be co-prime ministers, is what you're saying?
No, there couldn't be. One would be a prime minister, and the other one would be the deputy.
That's actually a really interesting point, Chewy. I mean, it'd be really interesting to talk to the leadership about that and ask them that question. Let's say that in 10 years from now, you're the dominant party. How do you pick a prime minister if you're if your rules say co-leadership? That's
and I mean, I think that's something that the general voting populace doesn't get about elections as well, is that this isn't America. We're not voting for a president. We're voting for a party.
Yeah.
Prime Minister is the leader of the party. And I think there's still a lot of voters out there that go out and vote for Jacinda because they like her, or they vote for John Key because they liked him. And that's what I'm voting for. I'm voting for the leader.
Yeah. Yeah. No, interesting. Really interesting. Anything else before we move on from this team?
Nope.
Let's talk about everybody's favorite conversation. Right wingers making interesting points. No, it's not actually what we're going to talk about.
I hate it already.
No, look, let me just say straight away. I mean, before we even went live stream, someone was commenting about Stephen Coward. Stephen Coward, this should be interesting. A whole atheist said that. And, to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of I can't get the word coward out of my head now. Crowder, Tim Crowder. I'm not a fan of his work. I think that it's really poorly put together, and the positions he takes, you can drive trucks through them.
Yeah.
So I don't see this as a piece about Stephen Crowder. I see this as a piece between two people talking about language. It doesn't actually matter who they are to me. So I just want to make that clear to start off with. Everyone probably knows, if you're an internet person like us and you watch stuff on the internet, you probably know about Stephen Crowder's idea of Change My Mind, where he goes to various places. He sits out on the street, he goes to a college, whatever, and he puts up a sign that
he's
says,
the meme guy.
Well, he is, but the one he was doing at a college said, biological males should not be competing with biological females. Change my mind. Now, we're not talking about that today, because that's the other reason I was comfortable using this. This conversation that's popped up is not about that actual change my mind debate. It's actually about racism. So it's between Stephen Crowder and a college student called Jackson, and they are talking about what is racist. And this is important to me, maybe to no one else in the world. So maybe I'm just doing this for me. I think George is nodding with that. Because, like I said at the start of the show, and for people who are watching us now live who weren't, words matter, definitions of words matter, how we use them in societies matter, how they evolve matter, and words do evolve, and then how that flows on into things like societal expectations and legislation. There's a path there between what a word is, how it's used, how it's taken on in society, and legislation that's made about it. I don't believe in the whole kind of, it's a fucking slippery slope. I'm not talking about that. I'm purely talking about what words mean and how we use them in society. This conversation has flowed on from a conversation we had yesterday about misogyny, because in that conversation, I was quite keen to delve into the idea what this word means and what it is, to which I got in particular quite a bunch of pushback, where I got told, I'm not prepared to explain this to you. Basically, I'm like, but that's the whole point of this conversation. We wanted to get an explanation around this. And when someone says I'm not prepared to explain this word to you or the concept of it or whatever. And someone like me wants to know, primarily for what I do as a job at the moment, then we're left still in this societal conversation where we go, well, hang on, how do we use these phrases? What do these words mean? And if we don't come up, and I guess what I'm saying with this is, if we don't come up with a societal approval of what these mean or how they work, then we actually can't have authentic and real conversations, and we can't communicate properly. Sectors of society just talk past each other constantly. And what I'm all about is sectors of society communicating clearly and obviously with each other. So that's kind of background or the basis as to why I think words matter, right? I'll play this conversation for you. And they're talking about sports, which, as we know, is the only thing I can ever do an analogy on. And they're talking about speaking in a way that is racist. And I'll even set it up, even though they kind of say this. They're talking about back in the days, baseball was segregated. There was a league for black only players, and there was a league for white players. And then they were combined. And then there's been a flow on. And as we've seen in many American sports in particular, people of African ancestry dominate those sports, right? That's the conversation. And the student's name is Jackson. He's articulate. He's smart. I'm interested in us having a look at what he thinks is a racist way of talking and what he thinks is not. So that's really the setup. I'll play this for a couple of minutes, watch it, and then we'll have a talk at the end. Mind you, if you want me to stop at any stage, we can Sam C to this mofo, and you can say, hold it there, and I'll pause it, and we can go on. But if you don't, I'll just play this for you, and you can have a listen to this conversation. So they start with talking about discrimination, and they're talking about those segregated baseball leagues.
I think I could compare your point to mine, where you'd see in the back segregation, right?
In the what?
Segregation.
Okay, yes.
Or any colored people in the United States. There's a different baseball league for both. Would you not call that discrimination?
Yeah, of course that's discrimination by definition. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, when I can say this because former Vice President Joe Biden said it, the United Negro League, once they mixed it, guess what? There weren't too many great white baseball players.
I believe there still is.
There are some, but the point is, they wanted to keep them out because we knew that there was some black speed and power, my friend.
I feel like that's extremely racist, isn't it?
Really? To say that black people are better athletes than white people in certain sports?
I think so, yeah.
Really? Have you watched an NBA game?
I'm not going to say either way.
Is it racist to say that the majority of the NBA is black?
I'm not going to say either way.
Is it racist for me to say that black people are typically better at basketball than the average white person?
I have no idea. I don't know the statistics.
I guess by definition it's racist, but I don't think that you would find a single black person here who disagrees.
I think that's a pretty broad point you're making. And obviously, I'm not one to say I'm not a person of color.
Well, you just said it's racist, so you did speak on behalf of black people.
Racist, absolutely.
To say that black people they make up a higher percentage of the NBA than white people.
No, to say that they're, that's not what you said.
In general.
Sure. What did you exactly say?
Let me give you a different one. In general, black people, black males, at the elite level are faster than white males.
I feel like that's a racist statement. Like,
have you checked any of the land speed records?
I don't know.
Look at the top 10. You're not going to find a Whitaker.
So we'll leave it there because that's the crux of the conversation. So I don't know. I'm assuming that neither of you guys have seen that, and you don't have to comment if you don't want to. But I'd be interested in your first take on that conversation to do with, racist language or not. Any thoughts pop into you immediately there, Chewy?
They're both right. It is a racist statement. It is a statement breaking two races apart. Something can be racist and not negatively racist.
Oh, that's interesting.
There's a lot of reasons for that situation that they're talking about, and it even comes down to, if you really want to get into it, like almost selective breeding. When you're looking at the American situation with slave ownership and that sort of thing, is that they looked for genetic traits like you would with livestock, as gross as that is to say out loud. So yeah.
Do you think that Jackson, who was the student, do you think he was meaning that's a racist statement, but I know you're using it in a positive sense? Or do you think he was actually going, you're a racist for saying that? Well, because I get the sense that Jackson's and I've done this because I wanted to make sure we were clear, because that conversation goes on and Jackson goes, that's not what you were saying. That's not what you were saying. So what I've actually done is I've actually scripted down what was said, just so people will know exactly what was said.
Now,
do you
I'm
think
going to say this.
when Jackson says it, extremely racist, he was meaning you're saying it in a positive sense, or do you think he was meaning though you're saying it in a negative sense?
Not in that particular one. I'd say he was being negative towards Crowder. You know, I'm not Crowder's biggest fan either. I don't like some of this stuff, or a lot of the stuff that he does. I wasn't picking up like a negative racial angle with him, and maybe it's because he wasn't punching down. You know, I've quite often said about that intent and whether you're punching up or down matters a lot.
Yeah, see, I think you're right. And one of the points I think we tried to or did make yesterday about the misogyny conversation was, I think intent has a lot to do it. And we were talking about the word cunt, and we were like, you know, you can say, oh, hey, sure, you're a good cunt, and it's obvious what the intent is behind it. If we don't know the intent, then it's hard to just. Let me just show you the next one. So this is what was said, right? This is I scripted this word for word, so we'd be able to have a look at it to see, is it racist? Who used to do that? There used to be a game show. I think it was Daniel Tosh. Is it racist? And then after this, before he got told again he was racist, this is all Stephen Crowder said. This is every word. He said, let me just skip forward. He said, this is the next statement he said, to say that black people are better than white people at certain sports. He said, have you watched an NBA game? He said, the majority of the NBA is black. He said, black people are typically better at basketball than the average white person. And then he reset the whole thing to say one more time. So he went, okay, I'll reset it so we're clear. He says, in general, black people, black males at an elite level are faster than white males. And the response from the student is, that's a racist statement.
And like I said, he's right. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go because there's someone at the door. 1 sec.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, you're talking about intent, and it also is about cultural connotations, right? It's about how, you know, that's how language works. The receiver of the communication needs to understand the cultural connotations. They need to speak the same language as well, and to receive the information in the way it was intended. The good cunt is a perfect example of that, because imagine saying that elsewhere, although due to like sort of, you know, the globalized nature of pop culture and sort of memes and stuff, people do it over the world sort of associate that with Australia and New Zealand and the UK, that they say cunt, not necessarily as a negative way. And again, that's a good example of how connotations change or are taught or are different in different spaces, and that sort of thing. As for the racism thing, like obviously the statement is race-based, and obviously there's like a history, and again this goes to cultural connotations. There's a history of the black man being represented as a sort of inhuman, strong fighter or athlete or worker, right? These are the cultural connotations that go along with that. And also, I wanted to say, like, if we're talking about intent and connotations, then it does sort of matter that it is Stephen Crowder saying these things.
Yeah, that's
right?
fair. Yeah. I mean, I've long been of the opinion since getting, and you know, George, that I love these conversations about language and stuff, probably too much. But I've long been of the opinion that I think we're in a transitional period in language at the moment, like a really significant transitional period in language, whether it's, you know, redefining what gender and sex is or redefining what the word racism means. And I feel like there's a really messy really messy point at the moment where whether it's going to change through attrition and older people dying out and new words coming on board, or whether there's going to be a societal change, that at the moment there is a lot of this kind of talking past each other, because I don't think it's racist if you look at the final of the Olympics and there is one Caucasian and there are 7, people of African ancestry, wherever they come from in the world, to say at an elite level, on average, black men are faster than white men, and here is the evidence for it. To have some kind of, and someone here says quite a good way to, this one here says, as it's a stereotype versus racism. Most racism leans into stereotypes, but not all stereotypes are racist. I mean, it might be a stereotype to say, a black man is faster than a white man, because it's not true in every instance. But if it is true statistically, when you look at the elite level, the fastest of the fast, then the stereotype in the elite level might be true. At a school, it may not be. Do you know what I mean? It's like finding what that means. And I'm
literally,
I'm very keen to find where this language is going to go.
Literally, stereotypes, or definitionally, to be annoying, stereotypes aren't true, right? Or aren't real.
Sometimes stereotypes are true. I mean, Irish people are incredibly light-skinned.
But then they become more than stereotypes, right? I think is what I'm trying to say.
You're right.
And also this whole idea about positive stereotypes is still deeply ideological, right? Because it's still saying this group of people is naturally this way, right? Or this other group of people. And even though it's so-called positive, doesn't mean it's something that should be sort of promoted and celebrated. Because on the one hand, some people might see athleticism as a positive thing, but on the other hand, it is a way that the racist discourse of the inhumanity of black men has been communicated. It's sort of been a vehicle for that racism. The idea that they are sort of brutish, strong men, right, and therefore, not like the sort of intellectual white man.
What if it's accurate? You said naturally this way, and as you were talking about that, I'm thinking about, for example, I wonder if what this is, and you've heard me say this before, and I've said it lots of times on this and other various broadcasts and podcasts, is that we typically legislate or set rules based on the overall data, not the lived experience. And if the overall data is accurate, for example, the body of African ancestry carries more muscle mass that could, or has more fast twitch fibers. If that is biologically accurate, why would it be a problem to say it, unless someone's lived experience living in that culture, in other words, going to an individual anecdotal thing, is not that. So they're like I said before, that I said Irish, but the Celtic skin is incredibly light. That immediately eliminates people who are Irish, but their grandfather was from Nigeria, to feeling Irish, but the overall data might be accurate, but the lived experience of that individual is not. And is that where the conflict is for this? And then if it is, how do we ensure, do we ensure the person who is the anecdotal evidence fits in, or do we need to grow up a little bit and understand that when we're talking about a broad range of people, this is what the data shows, but it's not, doesn't mean everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I have a fundamental theoretical, a different theoretical way of looking at the world to you, because when we call things natural and these sort of things, I see that as deeply ideological. These are things that have shifted throughout history and are not innate or not static, right? They're constantly moving, constantly dynamic and political, depending on who is in power, or who can sort of set the parameters of what is discussed in society and all that sort of thing. And that's why I make the point that the the language of that they're biologically this way is still a vehicle of racism.
So how does that work when I think is it Netherlands are the tallest people in the world on average? Like there's those things happen, like there are groups that you can attribute, and it may not be the Netherlands, but you think about the Scandinavian countries sort of thing. How do we then? It's almost like what I hear you saying, and I'm not saying this is exactly what you're saying, is those kinds of things are irrelevant, which they kind of are, but therefore if they're acknowledged, it could be used as a tool of racism.
Yeah, I don't see the tall Scandinavian thing hasn't really been a big feature of a discourse that's propped up a certain political or power relation.
I get it. So when you bring the historical side of it into it, gotcha. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, this conversation is going to continue on, and like what happened yesterday with the misogyny conversation, I love personally being left with things to think about, and yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm gonna keep thinking about that as well. Thank you for Chewy for joining us. Is there anyone you'll wrap up with? I'm not trying to cut this short. I'm just saying it feels like that's a natural point to get out of.
Yeah, obviously Chewy's having some issues and doesn't want to say goodbye to us.
Nasty. What a nasty pile of crap.
That's fine, but it is 10 past midday, so yeah, happy to head off, but very happy to talk about some of this stuff, because I mean it's like I've come out of academia and this is stuff I've been talking about for way too long, and not really being able to actually discuss it with the public or that sort of thing. So it's good to be able to communicate it openly.
There you go. The cunt example is a good example of how, for example, Facebook actually discriminates against other nationalities outside of North America, even though Facebook.com Street, supposedly are open to discrimination. Someone else says here, culturally, white men dominate strongman competition, South Koreans dominate esports, and black men dominate basketball. I mean, I would already say straight away, not that I'm siding with you, not we need to side, but one of the reasons, for example, South Koreans dominate esports, it's like New Zealanders dominate rugby, because it's our culture, because we're growing up, and that's a part of what we pushed into us from when we're 4 years old. So we produce the best rugby players in the world. It's sort of the same in South Korea with esports. It's like a national religion.
This is exactly my point, right? It's cultural, right? It will often refer to the realm of science or more specifically biology to sort of prop itself up. And say, hey, look over there. That's the science, right? That means this must be natural. This must be the right thing to do, right? And that's what ideology is.
And look, I can see that, and it's like hockey players in North America are typically white because it's huge in Canada, which is a very high white population, and that's what they do. But I guess, and I'm not trying to negate or debate the point, but when it comes to some of those kind of purist kind of Olympic sports, throwing, running, jumping, I don't know if there's any one culture, region, country that holds that. I mean, NBA, I get it because it's massive in America. It's one of their biggest sports, but that throwing, running, jumping, those most basic of sports that the world seems to compete with. When I say equally, I don't mean at the same level, but there doesn't seem to be a culture of sprinting in places, which is why you see, for example, Usain Bolt from Jamaica dominate, and then an American will dominate, and then it's not like All Blacks are always dominating rugby because of the culture of rugby from there. And I just wonder if that, and I don't want to say changes the conversation, but adds 10% more nuance to the conversation when you're talking about some of those purist things.
I mean, I'm not too sure what you're saying, but that's all right.
Well, what I'm saying is, someone says here, Fearless, the point that they were making, says it's non-biological. What I'm saying, when you're going to those, like sprinting doesn't appear to be cultural to me. That's what I'm saying. So in other words, less of a cultural impact, more of a purist sense of who is the fastest. And if it's dominated by primarily people of African ancestry around the world, I don't know if there's a culture that dominates.
Oh, dude. In West Africa, they love sprinting, dude.
They love long distance
There's
running.
really famous West Africans that are good at running fast, right?
Yeah, long distance.
Yeah.
Not so much the sprinting. That's what I'm saying. But look, this is, I guess,
Or
part of
running
the
in
process.
general.
Yeah, and that is cultural because they would run everywhere to
Yeah.
get from village to village, from point A to point B. That's what they did.
It's interesting if you look at the racial makeup of NASCAR, for example, the majority of the pit crews are
Yep.
African American, and the
Really?
majority of the drivers are white. Right?
Why do you think that is?
Because of historical segregation of labor. Right? That the drivers, well, for one, it's it's only very recently that a white man, that a black man was driving a NASCAR. You know, there's only been a handful of them that have done it, right? And then there's those very historical racist and white supremacy explanations for it, and then more recently there's a cultural explanation in terms of, again, because it was a white space, black kids didn't grow up really into NASCAR, but they might have been into other athletics, right? And then that becomes a skill that is needed in their workforce in terms of
What do you think then? And I love getting your perspective, George. You make me think about things that I don't often think about. Why do you think then that other areas of sport in America, and let's talk about NBA, that were a dominated by white males, is now dominated by black males? Why don't we see the same kind of, if it is because of historic racism and segregation, why don't we see that in sports like football and basketball?
What? Sorry, a change from what?
You talked about, when I asked about the pit crews versus the drivers, that there was a historic, segregation, and there's a history there that has caused, I guess, the black people to be more subservient. It's my paraphrase, or to play the more minor roles compared to the start. Why don't we see that in other sports, if that's the case, like basketball and American football, whereas all the stars typically, so certainly in basketball, are African Americans?
NASCAR is pretty unique. Well, not unique, but it's
But
pretty specific to the South, right?
Yeah, but if that was the case, that if it's a history of racism and segregation, wouldn't that be universal? Like, you'd see that trend amongst all sports in that part of the world. Like, there's lots of basketball teams that are based in the South as well.
No, I don't think you can universalize that, right? All of them have a very particular history and a place in America, right? I mean, the Southern 500 in Darlington was, if they a black man won that race once, and they disqualified him and sort of ushered him away because they thought there'd be a fucking riot if he went to the victory lane where you kiss the girl, and there's, Confederate flags flying absolutely everywhere, right?
Sure.
And you kiss the white girl. They thought there was going to be a riot, so they basically took the win away from him. So NASCAR is a very specific example, and I guess with the basketball one, I don't know much about the basketball history and culture and that sort of thing to sort of make to answer that question, really.
But you're saying that you don't think it needs to be a universal rule. It can apply specifically to I mean, there is no question that in the southern states of America, racism undertones are a lot more prevalent. So you can see why it would be more. Yeah. Hey, we're going to wrap. But Chewy just made it back to us. We should just bring him in to send him off.
Sorry about that, guys.
There'll be sociologists that approach these sorts of things like a hard science and try and make those laws or universal rules and that sort of thing apply to every case. But I guess, well, even in the humanities, you do that, right? You got a theory and you see if it applies to the case study. And sometimes usually the answer is yes, it sort of applies.
Hey, Chewy, you left us mid thing. We're about to wrap up. Do you want to add anything before we take off, or should we just bring you
I was gutted to have to leave then because this is a really interesting discussion. The one thought I was having just while I tried to hold a conversation with someone just before was the American experience is very different from the rest of the world.
Yeah,
because of their history and the things that have happened there and their racial mix and how they do sport. It's so entangled, but we don't necessarily see the same things happening everywhere else. I think it's a very American thing that he's trying to discuss, and you can't talk about anything in the States without acknowledging how messed up their racial history is.
Yeah. All right. Hey, well, let's wrap it up. Thanks for coming back, Chewy. We didn't say anything bad about you while you weren't here. Trust me. You don't have to. Don't check the tape.
I'll watch it back.
Don't check the tape.
Sure.
We said no. We only said positive things about you bailing. But there's no reason for you to go back and see anything we said.
This conversation's too hard. I'm out.
All right, George. Hey, thanks, dude. Appreciate all your work. Do you want to tell us, George, tomorrow you've organised someone to come on board and talk about things like International Space Station? Tell us about that.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
cool.
we've got shit. What's his first name? Sorry,
Gavin.
I haven't slept much. Gabriel Gavin. Gabriel
Gabriel.
Gavin is a freelance journalist. He writes for lots of different publications and travels around the world, although he's lived in Moscow for the past 2 years. And he wrote a article in the New Statesman about how basically the international, the final nail has been hammered into the coffin for the International Space Station. And we discussed how, I mean, the International Space Station was already going to go bye-bye because of private, because of the way that the space industry has changed in terms of private interests, like SpaceX, but also now with Russia and US relations being shitty, it's definitely going bye-bye now because space is extremely relied on cooperation between Russia and the US. Like even during the Cold War, it was an amazing space for cooperation between rivals. So yeah, we talked about that, and then a little bit about what it was like in Moscow during wartime.
Yeah, and also Chewy, your friend and mine, Frank Ritchie. Remember Frank Ritchie that we brought on board to talk about Destiny Church? He's a media chaplain. He'll be coming on tomorrow to have a chat with us because, can you guess why? Because it's Easter. And I just thought, well, it's Easter time. It's maybe time to get someone on to talk about what Easter is and what it's about and why we celebrate it, if at all.
That's great.
So Frank Ritchie will be coming on as well to have a bit of a chat about that. And anything else, guys? So thanks for coming back, Chewy. Good to see your beautiful face again. And I've got nothing else, so I'm ready to say goodbye.
Yeah, I'm all good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, viewers.
Hashtag, and thanks for the conversations going on in the chat.
Cool people today. Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't got a chance to get to all of you, but happy for a little community of conversations to be talking to one another in there as well. I'm not entirely sure how my name, George, how you did that. At one stage, I commented in there. I'm not entirely sure how that happened, but I see you noticed it was your name was George.
Maybe I'll let you know how I did that.
But George is now commenting on behalf of me, so that'll be where you see the most racist comments coming out, I'm sure. And we'll catch all the rest of you from tomorrow morning from 11 a.m. Thank you for your time. Hooroo from all of us to you. Ciao.